Welcome, everyone. This is the 9th episode of Take Me Back, the interviews. And it's a show where we bring on local folks and they talk about their memories of the Mad River Valley, and inevitably the conversations stray in other directions, which have been very interesting up until now. And today's the 9th one. So hopefully it's even better because I have some experience.
Hopefully so.
I am welcoming my friend who just happens to be a New York Times best-selling author. His name is James M. Tabor, and we've known each other in a lot of ways as parents and husband and wife and community member. And
go way back.
It's delightful to have you on. Thank you for
Thanks.
coming.
It's great to be here, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
I thought I'd start with our most recent collaboration because I've been very fortunate to have you mentor me in a variety of writing projects. And I always give you credit. I never would have published a book had you not given me encouragement early on. I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. You know, that gives me just a shot to the heart every time I hear it, because one of the things I learned as a young writer myself is that it's really important as we move forward to help other writers, because I got a lot of help coming up. And so I was really glad to do that. You know, it's really exciting. So you're welcome.
We're having a big success together lately in that as a fundraising tool, Jim was project mentor and I was publisher, I guess, of this book, Take Me Back, An Anecdotal History of the Mad River Valley. We sold it out in a month, which we're really proud of. I think you're getting a lot of good feedback, and so am I.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. And, you know, the best feedback is people are voting with their pocketbooks, right?
Yes.
Those things are selling like hotcakes.
They are.
Yeah.
I saved a few. I have some events. They're having me speak at the craft fair about the Take Me Back project.
Great.
Saved some for that day. And for some of the vendors that were real supporters of ours early on, they want to continue to carry it into
Right.
the fall. So I squirreled a few away.
Yeah. So your viewers probably know that proceeds from this go to support the local historical societies, right? Because I wanted to say that just in case. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And actually other organizations and our own projects. It's about raising awareness of and money for showcasing the history of the Mad River Valley. And, you know, my current fantasy that I'm working on now is to have high school students build a walking tour on Bridge Street to start.
Right.
And it would be interactive, so you'd hold your cell phone up, and there would be a short film with all kinds of written pieces.
That's a fantastic idea.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And everybody I talk to about it is willing to help because they love the idea.
Oh, and there's so many sources of funding for a project like that. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So that it can be that. It could be that the historical societies, if there are volunteers, because remember, 2 of the towns, Warren and Fayston, don't have any. So here's your chance, folks. Please call the town clerk and volunteer to start reinvigorating the effort to preserve our history. We're never going to stop needing historical societies. They preserve and protect our artifacts and photographs. And old photos can be very fragile.
Oh, sure. Don't we have a bunch of like glass plate negative photos?
Over 800.
Which are really fragile.
And they are overseen by Lois DeHeer of Waitsfield Historic Society. And she's carrying that burden on her own, so please give her a shout. If you have the book, one of the very first pages tells you how to get in contact with them. But you can find them online as well. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're trying to make a difference in preserving our history and showcasing it. So I want to talk about the day, and I'm trying to remember why we met at Three Mountain Cafe. But I had done something rather evil. I had put in an application for a grant from the Vermont Arts Council.
Right.
And when they got to the part where it required a mentor, I just wrote in your name without telling
That's
you.
why we met at Three Mountain Cafe. That's why.
We were meeting about something else, and I felt like I better confess. And I said, I don't know if they're going to give me the grant, Jim, but what do you think? And you were intrigued right away.
I was right away, you know, for a whole host of reasons. One of them was I would look forward to working with you on any project.
Thank you.
Period, right? Friend, another fellow person writer. This project I saw gosh, there's so many good things about it. You know, I used to write for Vermont Life back in the day. I reviewed inns and wrote some other articles for them, and I really regretted the demise of that publication. And I don't think anything has come along in its wake that's remotely like it. But I thought this came as close as anything I could think of. So that was, you know, the second exciting thing. And the other big thing for me is that, as you know, writing is a really solitary occupation. You're locked in a room with a computer or a typewriter or whatever, 5-6 hours a day by yourself. So any chance to get out of that office and mingle and collaborate and contact, jump at it for sure. And so this, you know, checked all those boxes. And so I was ready to go.
Well, I appreciate it. And I can tell you there were many times along the way where, I write about that some in the memoir section. This book is kind of a ribbon of memoir as to how the column happened. Take me back, the column, and where it led me to. As you know, I had tremendous resistance. People didn't want to be put in the public eye.
Right.
Even my husband refused to be interviewed. So I thought this was going to be so easy. and back to the historical societies, I thought I could just waltz in and there'd be all kinds of volunteers,
Right.
you know, throwing photos at me. You know, none of it came to pass. But I'm thinking about one of the difficult times for me. I sort of self-imposed deadlines to have information to you, and you agreed to those dates.
Right.
And we were to meet, and we met at Waitsfield Town Hall in the conference room.
Yep.
And I had my piles, literally just piles, if you can imagine, around the table,
Right.
trying to explain where I thought we should go.
Right.
And that was one of the days where I really thought, I can't pull it off.
Yeah. So I just laugh because I'm in the middle of writing my 7th book right now. And even though I'm 80,000 words into a 100,000 word book, I've still got piles all over, you know, my office, physical piles, mental piles as well in my head sorting through. So I can really identify with exactly what you're talking about. But what I remember is we took them and we laid them out all around the big conference table there, which is kind of a horseshoe thing.
Yep.
And it just started to flow. You know, there were a couple of glitchy places where the flow got broken, but it just kind of flowed like a river of paper around that horseshoe bend there. And then, boom, you know, at the end of that, it seemed to really come together. If that's where you were going, I really agree with that.
What happened for me was there was something that didn't feel right, but I couldn't identify what it was. And it was you who said, this section is another book.
Yeah,
and
right.
you just took it out, and then I could see it.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and that's, you know, that's the value of an editor. I will tell you that in every one of my books, my editors have been so helpful. I've told them their names should be on the spine too, because they bring just fresh eyes and fresh brain to stuff we get so close to. It's impossible to have objectivity about it, especially when you're in the middle of doing it, you know, maybe with 3 or 4 years hindsight. But we all get to that point. So that was a great opportunity to collaborate.
That is the first advice you ever gave me with my very first book. You said, nobody can work without an editor.
Oh, yeah.
It just can't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just exactly right. And, you know, I was a magazine editor for national magazines in New York City for a while. And I got to see that from the editor side of the desk, but I wasn't able to see the value, total value I was bringing to the writers. And some of them were really good. Edward Abbey, some national people. I was helping them a lot too, but I couldn't quite see that. But then when I started doing books and got the help I was getting from my editors at the publishing houses, I thought, oh my gosh, I couldn't do that without these people, these men and these women. It's an absolutely essential ingredient. So, yeah.
Doesn't it require something, and I'm not going to name which sibling it is, but one of my siblings can't take criticism. And I think this person is actually a better writer than me. But don't you think it's that kind of humility where you swallow it and live with it and start to try to make those changes? It's not for everyone, is it?
No, I don't think everyone can see it as a huge gift, which is, I think, what it is. It's a gift that publishers pay us, and then they give us these gifts of these great editors to work with. And I think good editing is like good psychotherapy. It's definitely a gift. But not everyone, I agree, can see it that way. Yeah.
Just too thin. It hurts too bad, and it does hurt. It hurts to throw away 100 pages.
Well, that's why they call it killing your darlings, right? You heard that?
No, I've never heard that.
I can't remember who came up with that. It was maybe Fitzgerald or somebody. But when you go through the editing process and the editor says, "Well, that's a great line, but we got too many words," out it goes. That's killing your darlings.
Right.
And sometimes you got to kill your own darlings, but it's much harder and it's easier for an editor to do the killing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think recently we had lunch and we agreed that the book was always better for the edit.
Yeah.
Always.
Yep. Completely.
Even as painful as it was. So I have your books here, just printed off the images so that I can remember all the titles. But one thing happened this morning as I was kind of reviewing your career and reviews. I was struck by Hallie, what's her last name?
Hallie Leland.
Hallie Leland's character. It was described as, beautiful, brilliant, and then there was always a third tag, which might be something like something of a badass.
Right.
Or, road warrior, just different terms, that she had been around.
Right.
So hold that thought for a minute.
Okay.
And then I want to read this. When a South Pole scientist dies mysteriously, CDC microbiologist Hallie Leland arrives to complete crucial research. Before she can begin, 3 more women inexplicably die. As failing communications and plunging temperatures cut the station off from the outside world, terror rises and tensions soar. Amidst it all, Hallie must crack the mystery of her predecessor's death. So something was going on up there, right?
You mean at the pole or in my brain?
Well, in both places, probably. But at the pole, something was happening that was causing deaths.
Yeah, indeed. Right. So what can I say without being a total plot spoiler? When you write thrillers, which is what this genre is, you have to have very, very high stakes. The world is threatened or the United States government is in peril, those kinds of things. So the stakes in this case were the elimination of about 1/3 of the world's population through an engineered pathogen that was being spread, the spread of which was coming out of the Amundsen Research Station at the South Pole. And the women who were working there and who were going to be going out at the end of the winter were the infection agents, or there's vectors, I think they call them. So that was what was happening, and that was what was causing the murders of some people who were getting onto the secret. The whole thing was being perpetrated by a group of very high-level scientists from outside, from different countries, who believed that this was the only solution to the world's critical overpopulating process. And so Hallie, who had a close friend there who died, came to investigate the deaths, but then quickly came to believe that her friend's death was a murder and suspicious. So she began to investigate, and after that, things got complicated.
And what year was this that you published?
Oh, that one came out in 2016, I think. 2016.
So I had read that book and hadn't thought as deeply about it as I was this morning.
Right.
But what struck me was the foreshadowing of this story against the mystery of COVID-19.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they call you the new Michael Crichton. Your brain somehow jumped ahead to the potential of labs and what they're developing.
Sure enough. And I started with that in the previous book in that series, The Deep Zone, where Hallie and a team go down into one of the deepest caves on Earth to locate an extremophile, as they're called, a life form down there, that can be the basis for new antibiotics to counteract a plague that's threatening to get out, and could be much, much worse than the COVID pandemic, worse than the 1918 flu epidemic. So the idea of pathogens and bioterrorism and things like that, that was always very fascinating to me. That's why I crafted these two books kind of around that threat.
Right. Well, congratulations. I mean, that particular thing really struck me this morning.
Well, good, thank you.
So the three Hallie Leland books are, say them again.
Well, there are only two published. So there's Deep Zone was the first one.
Right.
Blind Descent was Blind Descent was my nonfiction. Deep
Right.
Zone, Frozen Solid, and then there was a third one called Eden Burning, in which Hallie goes to Africa to investigate, in her capacity as a CDC investigator, an outbreak of an undrug treatable form of Ebola. And things. Unfortunately, that was designed to come out right when the Ebola epidemic began. So the publisher didn't like the idea of publishing a book about that was fiction at the time. So that book never came out, unfortunately. But
there's a short story too.
there is a short story, and I can't remember the title of it actually, but that has to do, to a certain extent, with that, I believe. I'll have to look at your paperwork
Yeah.
there too.
I just snatched some images off the internet.
Lethal Expedition, right. So that's the short story. And
that was published separately and tagged onto one of the other books.
yeah, it was exactly right. So that was a publisher's idea, experiment they tried. It was a Random House they tried back in those days. They felt that maybe hitching a piece of short fiction to a successful novel could pave the way for a short fiction collection coming down the pike, in case the author, the novelist, got stuck and couldn't do another long form.
Right.
And I'm not sure how that one sold, and I don't really know how that transpired. But that was the thought behind that. It was an idea that Random House had.
Another thing I noticed that I hadn't noticed before is in the different printings, I suppose, some of the covers changed.
That's interesting. I did not realize that because I've got hardcover copies and I've got trade paperback copies, and I haven't seen. I will take that back. I did see a change in my first book, Forever on the Mountain, the one from W.W. Norton. That cover, I have seen them change in the trade paperback to a different image, a different viewpoint. So that one I
Do
was
they
aware of.
tell you? I mean, maybe not.
Well, in the contract, there's something like author and publisher will come to agreement on images to be used and designs to be implemented and things
Right.
like that. And so what that means in practice is, and they've been really good to work with, all my publishers, they will generally have a discussion about, does this fit? Are you comfortable with this? And it took us a long time to come up with the cover for Frozen Solid, and they finally got an image that I thought was great. So it's a collaboration, but they're contractually, there's no legal binding that would require, as long as they consult with the author, they kind of got that base covered.
Right.
And they did. They didn't consult with me on the second cover for Forever on the Mountain, and I don't know why, but I liked it, so that was okay.
I'll just tell you a quick anecdote about the Belongers. So the day that we launched Take Me Back, I also launched my third novel called The Belonger, and it almost came to blows with my publisher. I hated the cover because it wasn't Grand Turk Island.
Uh-huh.
And she swore, it's Turks and Caicos. Well, maybe one of the other islands, but not Grand Turk.
Yeah.
And I went into it I hate the cover. And do you know, every single review has complimented the cover.
Well.
So when I'm wrong, I'm really, really wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's funny about covers and titles. Like no book I have written has ever been published under the title that I took it to the publisher with. They've always come out with different ones. I think, oh my goodness, what was the original title for the Deep Zone, which was a pretty successful novel, was something like the Moon Milk Salvation, because moon milk was this organism down in the cave, and they thought, my gosh, that sounds like a religious revelation book. We can't do that. That'll appeal to the wrong. So they came up with I will say in their defense, they have the marketing experience, behind them, vast, to kind of make decisions that are educated like that based on sales. If it sells more, as long as it's appropriate. I'm okay with that.
Well, I'll have much more humility next time, for sure. Now, I do want to go back, because we're here to take people back. I do have one question, though, and I hope it's not too technical for non-writers.
Uh-huh.
But I've been dying to ask you this for a long time. So I know that the Hallie Leland books are thrillers.
Right.
Can they be thrillers and also be women's fiction? Because she does change across the story arc.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would hope so. My goodness. I think that I'm much more clear on the parameters of the thriller genre than I am of women's fiction. I don't know if that requires a woman author, but for whatever reason, I feel really more comfortable writing inside the persona of a female protagonist.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've been asked that question before, like, why is that? Well, my dad died young. I was raised by my mother and 5 aunts. I was the only child. So I just got real comfortable being with women and around women, and that continues to this day. But I would hope that that book, because of the narrative arc and the protagonist's journey, would be of appeal. Because you're right, Hallie Leland is a badass. She's a great microbiologist, but she's done a lot of tough things in life, and they've made her pretty tough too.
Yeah. Well, I would, if you want my opinion, I think it's both, because, you know, like the difference between women's fiction and romance is that in romance, the couple is the story. In women's fiction, it's the female protagonist who we get introduced to, and she's challenged by circumstances and changes for the better.
Right. As your, just to switch around a little bit, as your protagonists inevitably do in the course of the stories of every one of your books, right?
Yes.
I'm thinking most recently, I think of The Belonger and of the challenges and the journeys your protagonist goes through and how she comes out at the end. Such a different, an admirably different person, I gotta say.
Right.
Yeah.
I just, you know, if anybody reads my work, one of my goals is I want women to be the heroes of their own life.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes.
Right? And
sure enough.
Nobody's more of a hero than Hallie. So, okay, we're going to go way back. Somebody thought you were born in Texas. I came across that, and I'm like, I didn't know that. And then I went to, you could see, I went to your website.
Yeah.
You were not born in Texas.
No, I wasn't born in Texas. That's an interesting mistake.
Interesting mistake. So why don't you just start us there? You were born in Virginia.
I was.
And where were you in Virginia?
Well, I was born in Newport News, but my father was a career Army officer, so we spent most of our life while he was alive in a town called Alexandria, which is midway between Washington, D.C. and Fort Belvoir, the engineer center, because my dad was an Army engineer. And we lived there until he died when I was about 8. And then we moved to Baltimore, and then we moved to West Hartford, Connecticut. But so that's kind of, you know, where I started and where I ended up, and then from West Hartford I went to the University of Vermont, and from there to Johns Hopkins, because they had a great MFA program at the time.
Yeah. I knew you went to Johns Hopkins. I didn't until this morning know you went to UVM.
Yeah.
I don't know how I missed that particular fact. So you were drawn to Vermont. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, when I was a southern kid, rarely seen snow, came up, and I had 2 stepbrothers and stepsisters, and 2 of them were ski instructors, and they introduced me to skiing when I was, I don't know, maybe like 9 or 10. And that was just instant love and obsession. So we skied. I got free lessons, free equipment. It was just a great entry into the sport. We skied all over, especially all over Vermont, because I would go with them.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, someday I'm going to live there, I'm going to go to college there, whatever. But there was just something about Vermont even then that just like grabbed me and would not let go.
You did such a great article for the Take Me Back column about coming at 14, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
And you took the train up.
So they had in those days a train that went from Hartford, Connecticut to Waterbury. And if you were kids that didn't have driver's licenses in those days, you know, your parents would let you ride the ski train up, and then you'd get shuttled to Mad River Glen or Stowe or Sugar Bush. And I did that in '63, I think it was February, and it was one of a number of ski train trips that I took with my buddies from school. gosh, it was a great experience. It was great being alone. It was great skiing Sugarbush, which at that time had the longest surface lift in North America. It was the gondola. It's just so exciting. So I took a number of ski train trips before I got driver's licenses, of course.
Right.
And it was just incredible, a lot of fun. And I have just amazingly fond memories and rich memories, some of which I was able to put in that article, thanks to you.
I enjoy it. I still enjoy it. It's in this book.
Yeah,
Take Me Back.
sure enough.
63. Now, just from the research I've done over the last 2 years, I think of 65 as the pivot when Randy quotes his father, Randy Graves, as saying, people from away. And now that's how I think of it.
Uh-huh.
So you had, even then in 63, there was a lot of local focus. Probably, did you see mills and farms?
A lot, sure enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people that were in service roles then at Sugarbush and especially at Mad River Glen were folks who were coming from logging, from dairying, from those kinds of occupations, which were harder to do in the wintertime, or which maybe even were becoming less and less easy to do. And so the burgeoning ski industry was a place where they were kind of migrating because the economic opportunities were there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, right around that time, as I understand it, I've had some members of the historic family explain to me that the can system of transport, you would fill the cans and they'd be chilled with ice water and be taken to Waterbury.
From milk, you mean?
Yeah, milk.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and the creameries there would take them send them to Boston, whatever they did, I
Right.
don't know. But there was a mandate from the government that they had to go to bulk systems. So now you're talking about machinery for milking
Oh, yeah.
and big tanks and refrigeration, and it wouldn't necessarily be able to do on a dirt floor barn.
Uh-huh.
So the investment to come up to bulk was so great, many people lost their herds and their farms.
I did not know that.
It was really, because I really think of it as a tale of two cities. All the while that Sugarbush is creating this glamorous escape for folks in their fancy ski outfits and whatnot.
Right.
Now we have our local families suffering. And yes, they did get jobs, but they were seasonal, right? They were regular, but they were seasonal.
Right.
So it was just sort of replacing one very difficult set of circumstances with another.
Sure. So I just turned the tables on you for a second. Tom must have lived through that period himself, right? Because he would have been, like maybe 10 or so in 63, 65?
He and I were born in 55.
So does he have positive or painful memories? Or do you even know of that period or that transition?
He enjoyed, there was a period where it was still so rural. He could take his little trucks outside on Route 100 and play with his trucks in the dirt.
Wow.
There were very few cars. He has fond memories of that, of riding his tricycle. There he is.
Oh,
In front of Elmer. His grandfather was Elmer Mehuron.
right.
And it was just, the children could run wild through the village because there just weren't that many people here.
Right.
But the weekends, it would change because Sugarbush was open.
Yeah.
And then, Mad River was open, and then Sugarbush opened in around 63. And he enjoyed seeing these different types of people. But then, I think it's 65 when, like I say, it's the pivot when there were just like a lot of folks coming and buying up land and so forth.
Yeah.
Very much really like it is now. We're wondering the future of our valley. What's
Right.
it going to look like?
That's a really open question. With people buying houses sight unseen and bidding above asking price
Right.
from out of state, that's something I never would have ever thought possible. Of course, COVID drove that. I remember also back in 63, 65 that people were coming sometimes for political reasons too to Vermont, because they opposed the war, they didn't like the establishment, whatever. And so, especially down in southern Vermont,
Right.
there were more and more people coming in New Age folks who liked what Vermont had to offer, didn't like what they were leaving behind in New York and Boston, places like that. So there was that population change too.
Would you call that the back to the land movement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I definitely would. There were communes for sure, and I, I think in some ways this influx of new folks to the valley these days has been required a bit of an adjustment for people who have lived here a long, long, long time.
Yes.
And I'm sure that was true back in the days too, when the Back to the Landers came, because Republicans, I think Vermont was a rock-ribbed Republican state in those days, and the folks coming up tended to be not conservative in their politics. So I think there was some growing pains.
And I was sitting on the porch of All Things Bright and Beautiful yesterday discussing the Take Me Back project with Gaelic, who's one of the twin sisters who owns the business All Things Bright and Beautiful. And we were looking around at really how pretty much unchanged the historic village is.
Mm-hmm.
And her thinking, which is kind of brilliant, she said, I think it was the huge shift in population. For instance, Alan Mehuron, it didn't have enough parking. It didn't have enough room. He had to create the Mehurons that's in the strip mall now.
Uh-huh.
And she feels that change happened so fast that there wasn't a lot of monkeying around with the historic buildings.
Right.
Bisbee's moved.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
So you would know this. I don't. Was Mehuron's in the shopping center? Was that the first building, sort of the anchor, the cornerstone of that whole development in there?
Boy, I feel like there were a few. I mean, it definitely got added on to
Yeah.
through time, but I know it was originally just one rectangle, and then it's been bumped out to have the kitchen and the deli, back there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I remember when Tommy built where the liquor store is now.
Uh-huh.
That was huge. He had to take out a giant loan.
Yeah.
Sometimes he would sleep on the conveyor belts because there wasn't serious. He was working so hard to pull it together that he didn't have time to go home and go to bed.
You talk about dedication. That even beats being a dedicated writer. I give him credit, man. That's amazing.
I know. I know. And we're so proud that our son is the fourth generation in the store.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful thing too. And I just got to give maybe a plug. He's done some wonderful things in there, some innovations he's brought in, the new menu in the deli and the seafood,
He's having fun with it.
Great. Yeah, he looks like it. When I talk to him, he's like always smiling. And I mean, if you can do what you love and love what you do, he's a lucky guy, but he's also doing a great thing for all the rest of us.
Well, he's also lucky that many of his childhood friends have come in to be with him.
Yeah.
So, that makes a really fun day.
Yeah, yeah.
When you can work with your friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so you're visiting Vermont.
Yeah.
Skiing here,
Yeah.
in love with skiing.
Yeah, loved it. Yep.
And you decide to go to UVM.
Yeah. I went to UVM in the mistaken impression that I might be good enough to get on the ski team. Nope, not even close.
Really?
Right. And also the really mistaken impression that I might be a doctor. So I started out in pre-med. Nope. After 2 semesters, that was clearly not going to be my role in life. I look back and it was such a bad fit.
What do you think drew you to medicine in your mind?
Yeah. My grandfather, Sidney Tabor, was a doctor in Virginia. Made his rounds on horseback in the very beginning. I've got pictures of him with his little black bag up on a beautiful horse. And he was a wonderful man who, after my father died, had a significant amount of contact and influence with me. And and one of my closest cousins was also a doctor. So I thought, and there was the prestige involved with it too. So I thought that'd be good for me to try. But at the same time, I met the writer in residence at UVM, a guy named Alan Broughton. And he said to me, after looking at some of the stuff I'd written, if you wanted to work at it, you could make a living at this. You might not get rich, but you could make a living. And I really enjoyed writing as much as I hated doing math and science. So, in a way, that was kind of following the path of least resistance. But after not very long, I knew this is where I'm going. So, I had a typewriter when I was 6 years old. I was writing stories way back then, just because I loved the process of doing that.
Can you remember what you were thinking at 6? Were you able to absorb structure, for example?
I knew what stories were. I was a really early precocious reader, so I could read teen or even adult books when I was 6 or 7 years old. Maybe not get all the meaning out of them.
Right.
But I remember because my dad was in the Army, so I wrote stories about guys who were in the Army, like soldiers in World War II or soldiers out on Fort Belvoir having a difficult time because they had a bad sergeant or their tank broke down. So there's always a little narrative arc, even though I didn't realize exactly that's what I was doing. But it's just all kind of that thread that led to UVM and then led to the MFA with John Barth, and then, led to what I'm doing today.
So I'm going to look at, because this is your bio. It's on your website, so I
Yeah.
assume you wrote it.
Yep.
So you went to UVM. Now you wind up contributing to Outside Magazine, Ski Magazine. Was that before the master's degree?
That was after. So I got my master's degree in, that's kind of a funny story. Got my master's degree in fiction thinking, I'll get out, I'll get a teaching job at some small college with a prestigious MFA, and that'll be my writing career just taking off. Well, it was 1974, terrible recession, very few jobs. PhDs were like tending bar and digging ditches and stuff.
Right.
I had a new family, had a kid, son, and I really needed a paycheck. So the only place that was hiring was the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C., which was then the murder capital of the country. But they were paying bonuses to guys with college degrees. So
That's
I said,
how you wound up a police officer.
yeah, that looks pretty good. I'll give that a try. It might be exciting. And so I signed up and I did almost 6 years with MPD and 4 years on the street, uniform patrol, did some undercover, some vice. And then I ended up getting promoted to sergeant, going to the academy, spending a year there, and then going on to a different job. But that was just this kind of little a detour. And I look back on it and I will tell you that it gave me some of the best life experience in all my 75 years. I would not trade it for anything.
Was there any gap between UVM and the graduate program?
Yeah, there was. So let me see. I didn't want to go to graduate school. I wanted to get out and write. So I got out of UVM, moved to Washington, D.C., and then to a remote farm in Virginia where I just wrote, tried to get published and failed.
As will happen.
Right. But I was writing stuff good enough that it caught the eye of this famous novelist, John Barth, who back then was like the Dan Brown of today, Da Vinci Code guy. And Barth invited me to come and study with him for 2 years at Johns Hopkins, and so that's how that happened.
What an opportunity.
Oh, it was amazing, and it just came to me, which was a good thing because I wasn't making any money, right? Writing stories or whatever. Yeah. But then I got the MFA degree, and I will tell you that I was probably the only person in the history of MPD, Metropolitan Police, that was on there with a creative writing MFA degree.
It's so interesting. So you finished grad school, and now you have some opportunities.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
So, I had been doing some writing for Outside Magazine, kind of about stuff like hang gliding and diving and stuff like that. And I thought, I could make maybe a career out of nonfiction writing about these kinds of adventure things. And so I signed on as a magazine editor with a company called Ziff Davis, and they were publishing things like Sport Diver, Adventure Travel, Backpacker, a bunch of magazines like that. Mm-hmm. And so I got hired as an editor to work on a number of those sort of outdoor activity adventure magazines. And that was a lot of fun because I got sent, they paid for my expedition to Mount McKinley, or Denali, for example. That was great. And to another one, to Mount Sanford, which was the 5th highest mountain in Alaska. But then I had some entrepreneur friends of mine say, we're going to start a little publishing company in Vermont. You want to join us? Because I was working in New York City at that time. I said, yes. So I was on that. And we published Cross Country Skier Magazine, Adirondack Life, Spray, some cross-country skiing annuals for, 3 or 4 years. I was just thinking back, my life has had such weird twists and turns. Then I got recruited by the public broadcasting system, National PBS, to host a national outdoor adventure travel series.
How did that happen? I've read that many times. I'm thinking, how do you jump from there to there?
They saw some of my writing, some of their people who look for hosts saw some of my writing in Outside, and they thought, well, if this guy can talk and walk, and if he looks not frighteningly bad, he might be a good host for a new series. So they came over and they screen tested me, and you know, this is kind of a ham thing to say, but right from the get-go, I was comfortable in front of cameras, and I had good writing credentials, so they hired me. And, you know, for 2 years, I hosted The Great Outdoors, which was a national PBS series. Most fun I ever had in my life. We traveled all over the world with a film crew of 7, and just did incredible. Like, I went hang gliding with the guy who invented the hang glider, Francis Rogallo.
Wow.
I went windsurfing with Kelby Ano, the world champion woman windsurfer. So it was experiences like that that were just priceless, and that I was getting paid to do. So
I have noticed through the years that you do not share my stage fright. You really don't have it.
yeah, well, I think being on national television was certainly one thing that helped me a lot. Doing a lot of author appearances before large and small audiences around the country has also been really helped, because early on I would just get as nervous and as anxious as anyone, but after a while I just did it enough to know these people are here because they like me, you know, they want me to succeed, they want me to have fun, and I was able to internalize that, and so I started to come to think of the camera as my good friend, and that helped a lot.
So you're back in Vermont.
Yeah.
You're working with friends. How were you living in the valley?
No, this was.
How'd you get to the valley?
Yeah, well, our offices were down in Brattleboro, and we published out of there. I lived down there for quite a while. And how did I get back to the valley? Well, let's see. I remarried, and my second wife decided, we both decided we wanted to move a bit farther north because the skiing wasn't really very good down there. We knew the skiing was better up here, and that was really the motivating factor. Came to the valley because Waitsfield had a phenomenal elementary school at the time. We had a couple of kids, young kids.
They still do.
They still do.
Yes,
Absolutely. So we settled in. And that's been 30 years ago, and never looked back. And so, yeah. And I tell people this all the time. I traveled all over the world for my writing and stuff, all over the country. Never found a place with the magic that the Mad River Valley has. And that's not a plug for the book. But that's really true, honest, right from the heart stuff. So it's a really unique, special place. And I'm so glad to be here.
I think everyone is, and I've been really thinking lately that maybe in the column, or maybe this format, I'm not quite sure. I would like to identify why more closely.
That's a great idea. That would be something really excellent to explore, because magic is hard to explore. But if you can get articulate people like your authors to do it, that would be fascinating.
It would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Because everybody I know says that same thing.
Right.
That this is a magical place.
Yeah, because you don't find that in Stowe. You don't find that in Londonderry, where I live. You don't find that in Putney. And I'm not knocking these places. They're all fine. But none of them have what the Mad River Valley has, which is magic.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We can dig down deep
Yeah,
and find out what that's all about.
Sure enough. Yeah, good.
I'm also curious. Jim's son, Jack, and my Johnny were very close friends, and even more so as they got older.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It got to the point where it was sort of the two of them, very multi-talented kids, who were trying to make it in the art world.
Yeah, right.
And they could share a lot of experience. So it became tighter and tighter across time. And I always just thought of you as a writer, and your wife Liz was a nurse.
Yep.
And
actually, she wasn't a nurse, but she had a master's degree in public administration, and so she was a housing manager for the Vermont State Housing Authority.
Okay.
So she sort of had management responsibility for properties that they administered all around the state.
But John would, from time to time, he would correct me and say, he has regular jobs too, So what did he mean?
Well, so I started writing and publishing books and right around 2001, 2002. I had written for magazines for 10 years, the top national magazines. I did really well at that. I was making a good living. But I had to travel. I had to plan to travel two weeks out of almost every month to write, like for Outside and Smithsonian and Time and Wall Street Journal and those places where I was working for. And that didn't really make for being a good father or a good husband. So I had to step out of that writer channel for a while and take more conventional jobs, a whole series of them, really until our kids got out of college and were clear, kind of free on their own.
Right.
When that happened, right around, basically around 98 or so, that's when I was able to get back on my writer track and just do that purely. But there was about a 15, 18-year period where I was doing things to keep the family together, like
that's what I want to know.
yeah.
What
so
things?
I was like the vice president of marketing and sales of Stratton Corporation down when Interest owned it.
Okay.
I was the director of communications for Breckenridge Ski Resort out west. I was the senior vice president for one of the top 3 ad agencies in Burlington for a while, back in the day when ad agencies were still flourishing up there. So most of the stuff I did, the common thread was writing, because I had to write for all of those things. So, and it certainly kept, food on the table and a roof over our heads and stuff. But I always knew one of these days I'm going to get back in the writing channel, and eventually it did happen.
I tease John, particularly my son John, is a director in Hollywood, and he's the pressure. You can't believe it. I said, "You want pressure? 3 kids and a mortgage and college tuition. That's pressure."
He'll probably get there, but that is true.
It forms who you are because you want to do the best for them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would never change that. I would not want to look back and say, well, I put my family second and my books first. And there are authors who do that, and that's their choice. I respect them.
Right.
That's something I would not be comfortable living with today. So,
I'm not sure everyone knows that your son Damon is a very successful writer.
well, my goodness, yeah, he is. So he wrote for a lot of national magazines, New Yorker, Atlantic, Harper's, and stuff like that. And then he made kind of the traditional jump that writers like that do, and he got a really great contract with Random House to write a book about the secret liaison between the smoke jumpers and the Central Intelligence Agency, which nobody knows about. It's a story that's never been broken. So he's been working on the book for about almost 4 years now,
Yeah.
and it probably will come out maybe next summer. So yeah, and I think it'll sell very well, and I think he'll be on his career as a book author.
Here's another question I've been saving till the day I got to interview you. I wonder how he's watching you. He's watching how you handle your career,
Right.
your goals.
Yeah.
What did he do the same, and what did he do different, do you think?
Well, for one thing, he started out at a college where he wasn't really happy at all. I loved UVM. He was not happy, so he stopped that, and he went out and he had a lot of good life experiences, which was quite different. He did one of those train excursions around Europe. Then he came and did one around the United States. He worked with these youth sort of conservation corps that went out and made all kinds of hard work improvements to national parks and forests and stuff like that. And he got a lot of real world experience under his belt. Then he went back to college in Richmond, studied, and found that he just really loved writing too. In his case, he was more of a nonfiction writer, so he went to Columbia School of Journalism and got his master's degree there, and came out, and that was a great credential to have because it opened some career pathways for him.
How old was he when he emerged from Columbia?
I think he would probably be about 20, between 25 and 28, thereabouts.
So he took that time to do the exploring.
Yeah.
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 That's interesting.
And I think he would say the same thing about that I say about being a street cop in D.C., that it gave him experiences that, a white upper middle class kid otherwise would never have had.
Right.
And really enriched and expanded him as a person.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to his new book. And your new book. Do you want to talk about Cable Man?
Yeah, so this is my 7th book. It's narrative nonfiction, which is this nonfiction that's supposed to read thrillingly like a novel. The title is Cable Man, Cyrus Field, the Great Transatlantic Cable and the Making of Our World. Cyrus Field was an American entrepreneur who laid the first transcontinental telegraph line under the Atlantic which was their internet. It transformed their world overnight, more quickly and more dramatically, even than the internet has ours. And it's a great untold story because everything we have today, Google, Facebook, TikTok, all that stuff, you can trace it back. The root was this transatlantic telegraph cable. It's a great story of human sacrifice. It took Field 12 years to do it. It destroyed his health, almost killed him, blew his family apart at one time, impoverished him. So he made a tremendous amount of sacrifice. A lot of thrilling risk and stuff on the high seas because they didn't have very good ships or technology then, but they were out on that Atlantic Ocean laying that cable for weeks and weeks at a time. So I'm contractually, I have to finish the manuscript by December 1st. I'll probably make it by December 31st. And so that if I do that, then it'll come out late next spring, hopefully in time to be a good beach read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know we're laughing about deadlines. It's sort of an inside joke. You can just imagine it's the proverbial gun to your head.
Yeah, and it never gets taken away. It's always there because it's inside your head. You can't get it out. At the same time, it's a good prod, to keep one glued to the project.
But you're pretty disciplined. You write when you have writing days, you sit down and do it.
I do, and that's been grooved just because I've been doing it one way or another. Well, for books now since almost, goodness gracious, 22 years. But here's the difference between you and me, because we've talked about this. I don't like writing, but I love to have written. You like the process.
I do.
The writing process, and I will tell you, folks, that's not very common among writers. Most of them. The initial process is not so much fun. I'd love to hear you talk about that because I would like to have it to be fun too.
I feel like it's an addiction in a way. If I don't feel like my day is complete if I haven't written. And it can be, well, now with everything going on, I'm raising money, developing the history projects. There's so many different directions my head is going. I'm working on my 5th novel.
Yeah, I know.
It's harder to find the kind of time I want, but every day I'm writing about something.
Yeah.
Do you do something, right? I mean, you're gonna, whether it's taking notes or corresponding for research.
Yeah. So in the beginning, it's almost all front-loaded research. Going to historical archives, interviewing people, stuff like that. And then at some point, that transitions to being mostly putting words on paper, which is where I am now. And I try to do that 4 or 5 hours a day, every day. So that's my process. But what I admire about you is you're able to write this novel and do all these other things at the same time. And I admire you because I just
it's easier now. What I found was when I'm on interview programs, they're very surprised to find out that I was a math teacher for 40 years.
Yeah.
I couldn't teach a math class and write in the same day. It's like there's a toggle switch somehow. I don't know which side of the brain it is. But now that I'm not teaching, that I'm writing every day,
right.
It's still different subjects, but at least it's all writing.
Yeah. Another really amazing thing I think about you as an author is that you have, whatever the side of that brain is, the mathematical expertise and inherent ability, which is kind of antithetical to writing. I think you won't find many writers who are good at math or many mathematicians who are really good writers.
That's what they tell me when they interview me.
But you were able to work out at both sides of the brain, and that's pretty darn unusual.
Well, but it influences me. Now, I've made a study of pacing and story arc.
Yeah.
I needed to understand. You don't get. I published my first book when I was 60. I had a lot of learning to do, and I still do. And I just didn't think you get better if you don't really become a student of writing.
Sure.
But what happened in my brain was, if there is such a thing as a story arc, and there are 15 kind of standard beats, that means it's mathematical. I can identify now in a word count. Well, obviously, let's take the midpoint shift because that's the easiest. The midpoint shift where the story goes in a completely different direction has to be in the middle, right? Well, there are other ways to plant those, and I write with a calculator.
So
I think that's unusual.
Yeah. So you're a liner, right? You know about this. There's liners and pantsers.
Yeah.
Right. So liners are people who outline their books before they write them, and the pantsers are people who like right from the seat of their pants. They just start going. So you're a liner.
I think I'm a hybrid. The opposite of Never, which was my second novel.
Yeah.
I didn't know the ending to the day I wrote it.
Uh-huh.
Total by the seat of my pants. However, there was a lot of wasted time.
Uh-huh.
I could see it. That was part of my learning process.
Yeah.
That's when I began to study and take graduate courses and so forth. And so now what I do is at least what the new book is Boulder Road in the Kingdom. And I wrote a 50,000 word first draft. Then,
Just from the seat of your pants?
Just
Straight
from the
going?
seat of my pants.
Ah.
Then I went, now, this is what I'm doing right now, is trying to identify the story beats. And at what point, if I'm shooting for an 80,000-ish novel,
Yeah.
where do they have to go?
Uh-huh.
I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's somewhere in between.
I was talking once with Lee Child, the guy who wrote the Jack Reacher series of novels.
Yes.
In New York, and I asked him, I said, are you using an outline? And Lee said, not now, because at that point he'd written like 19 of them. And so they were, he had the outline in his head. I suspect that you've written enough books now that you've got the outline internalized, and that's why you can just go so you're kind of an internal liner, but you're working as a pantser.
Did I tell you I got into the Savannah College of Art and Design writing?
No, you didn't tell me that. Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. So it was Johnny, of course.
Yeah.
John's my biggest cheerleader.
Right.
And we were in Savannah last winter, and I said, I'm trying to find a writing group. And he's like, damn it, Mom, because he doesn't think I have enough self-confidence.
Ah.
He said, they have one of the best writing programs in the world in Savannah.
Sure enough.
I said, oh, and they're going to take an old woman like me. I said, he wouldn't let it go. Did you apply? Did you apply? And I applied, and almost immediately they took me. So I'll be taking more graduate work this winter.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be really fun to be around young people
Oh.
in such a mysterious city and seeing what they're doing.
Yeah. So you won't do this distance. You'll be on site.
Yes.
Right? Because you have this house in Savannah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and you're right. I mean, their reputation is international as a fantastic program. So congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
I didn't know that. First I learned of this.
I'm sure, like any other of the other choices we've made, and when we work hard, I'm going to come out a better writer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If there's one thing, and this is maybe the only thing that I long for here in the Valley, and there's not many other things, it's more contact with other writers.
Yes.
And so I've been thinking about teaching a workshop or a series of workshops, because I've learned a lot in all the years I've been doing writing as an editor, as a writer, nonfiction, fiction, just to be able to have time with other writers who are serious about their craft. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Because I may put that together and do it.
A masterclass.
Exactly.
People that are experienced and interested and willing to work hard.
Sure enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And we should, I've already got myself in as your assistant. It'd be really fun to offer a couple scholarships for young people.
Great idea.
Right?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Okay. Yeah, we'll work
Here
on
we
this
go.
together. Another project.
And we're just about time up. We're actually a little over. We usually go about 50 minutes.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thank you for the 9th episode of Take Me Back, the interviews. And I've enjoyed this so much. In fact, I'm thinking, would you be willing to come back for a second episode at some point?
Some point, sure.
Maybe when the book's done.
That's sure enough.
Want to do
It'd be
it?
great timing. That's a promise.
It'd be so fun to talk about how it's all going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know
Okay.
you're crazy busy right now making that deadline.
But it'll get published.
Yeah.
We'll do it then.
Just let me quickly say to our viewers, if you have someone in your life you think really should be interviewed, because ultimately the reason we do this is to preserve the stories. It's nice to have a little TV show, and it's going to be on the radio, and we're going to do podcast with these recordings. But ultimately, it is remembering our history, taking us back.
Yeah.
So get in touch with me. It's pretty easy. My name is Mary Kathleen Mehuron. I have a website. It will come up. And shoot me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Been
Great
fun.
to be here. Yeah.